Welcome to Music History Monday for August 19th, 2024. I'm Bob Greenberg, and the title for today's podcast is Serge Pavlovich Diaghilev. We mark the death on August 19th, 1929, 95 years ago today, of the Russian impresario, patron, art critic, and founder of the Ballets Russes Serge, or Sergei, Pavlovich Diaghilev, in Venice. Born in the village of Selishchi, roughly 75 miles southeast of St. Petersburg on March 31st, 1872, he was 57 years old when he died. Movers and shakers. Serge Diaghilev was one of the great movers and shakers of all time. In a letter to his stepmother written in 1895, the 23-year-old Diaghilev described himself with astonishing honesty and no small bit of prescience, given the way his life went on to develop. Quote, "I am firstly a great charlatan, though con brio, meaning vivacious and spirited. Secondly, a great charmer. Thirdly, I have any amount of cheek, meaning chutzpah, moxie, nerve. Fourthly, I am a man with a great quantity of logic, but with very few principles. Fifthly, I think I have no real gifts. All the same, I think I have found my true vocation, being a patron of the arts. I have all that is necessary except the money, but that will come." Unquote. Serge Diaghilev's audacious and spectacular career was intertwined completely with the audacious and spectacular career of one Igor Stravinsky, 1882 to 1971. Without Diaghilev, Igor Stravinsky would never have become Stravinsky, the enfant terrible of Western music in the years before World War I. Without Diaghilev, Stravinsky would never have seen his career reborn and finances recover after the war. Consequently, I'm going to dedicate this post to not just Monsieur Diaghilev, but to his discovery of and ongoing relationship with Igor Stravinsky. A special day. January 24th, 1909 was a most special day for the 26-and-a-half-year-old Igor Stravinsky. His Claude Debussy-influenced Scherzo Fantastique was performed in a concert by the Russian Symphony in St. Petersburg, and in the audience was the impresario Serge Pavlovich Diaghilev, who liked what he heard. Stravinsky later described their meeting. Quote, "After the concert, Diaghilev sent round his card with a note asking me to call the following day at 3 p.m. Of course I knew who he was. Everybody did. So I went. There was a small entrance hall. I sat and waited. Laughter could be heard from an inner room. Time passed. I grew restless. After 20 minutes, I got up and moved to the street door. As I grasped the handle, a voice behind me said, 'Stravinsky, predite, predite, come in, come in.' I went in. You know, I've often wondered if I'd opened that door and left, whether I would have written The Rite of Spring." Unquote. Diaghilev was the child of a provincial aristocrat. He was sent to St. Petersburg to study law, but ended up studying music composition instead. He managed to graduate from the St. Petersburg Conservatory in 1892, despite the fact that his teacher, none other than the venerable Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, who would 13 years later become Stravinsky's teacher, told him that he had no talent for composition. Undeterred, Diaghilev set out to make himself an expert in Russian and Western European art. By 1899, he was producing ballets and operas for the Imperial Theater in St. Petersburg. In 1905, he mounted an exhibit of Russian art in St. Petersburg, and in 1906, he took the exhibition to Paris. And so began Diaghilev's long-term love affair with Parisian audiences. By 1908, he had presented to the Parisians Russian painting, Russian music, Russian opera, and, as he put it later, from opera to ballet was but a step. In 1908, Diaghilev founded the Ballets Russes, the Russian ballet, as a showcase for Russian dancers and designers. In his superb study, Rites of Spring, Mariner Books, 2000, historian Madras Ecksteins picks up the story. Quote, ballet in Paris, as in most of Europe, had sunk by the end of the 19th century to a display merely of prettiness, pleasant, controlled steps, and charming costumes, a little Italian virtuosity, as Richard Buckley put it, tricked out with a lot of French coquetry. Stage decoration was not an art, only a craft left to artisans. The Russians changed all of this. The sets of Bakst, Benoit, and Roerich, with their bright and provocative colors, were stunning, no longer merely a backdrop, but an integral part of the spectacle. The choreography of Fokine called for a new energy and physical ability, captured breathtakingly in Nijinsky's leaps and Pavlova's and Karsavina's grace. The themes were exotic, usually Russian or Oriental. The music was different, and the dance was not simply an attempt to relate movement to sound, but to express sound in movement. Unquote. Every season, Diaghilev's productions became more sexually overt, the music more modernistic, the choreography more adventurous, and the sets more striking. Diaghilev was a born provocateur, and he knew that nothing put derrieres in theater seats more effectively than a whiff of scandal. In a letter written in 1897 to the painter and stage designer Alexandre Benoit, 1870 to 1960, Diaghilev laid out the philosophy that would rule his career as an impresario. Quote, "It is success, and only success, my friend, that saves and redeems all. I do have a rather vulgar insolence, and I am accustomed to telling people to go to hell." Unquote. Diaghilev's private life was no less theatrical than his productions. Openly and flamboyantly homosexual, Diaghilev made a stir wherever he went. Stravinsky once referred to Diaghilev's entourage as, quote, "a kind of homosexual Swiss Guard," unquote, the Swiss Guard being the Pope's own bodyguard. For Diaghilev, the world was his stage. His greatest genius was for creative administration. He could spot talent the way a spy satellite can fix on a license plate from 100 miles up. He could bring talent together and then impose his own taste, vision, artistic and aesthetic will on a project. He was a certifiable egomaniac and a born leader, a prototypical CEO who created a way of doing things that had not existed before him. The medium of ballet became Diaghilev's all-inclusive art form, and through ballet, he managed to influence almost all of the arts of his time, including music, theater, painting, literature, design, fashion, and even early cinema. This, then, was the guy that 26-year-old Igor Stravinsky met in St. Petersburg in January of 1909. A Russian ballet. Diaghilev hired Stravinsky to orchestrate 2 Chopin piano pieces for the inaugural 1909 season of the Ballets Russes. Stravinsky's arrangements were well received. But even as that first season of the Ballets Russes approached, Diaghilev and his people were planning the second 1910 season. The first season was dominated by 19th century Russian music. Diaghilev knew full well that the second season was going to have to feature something new, something brilliant, something exotic, and, for a Parisian audience desperate to have their taffeta ruffled, something untamed. Diaghilev wrote, quote, "I need a ballet, and a Russian one, the first Russian ballet. There is Russian opera, Russian symphony, Russian song, Russian dance, Russian rhythm, but no Russian ballet. And that is precisely what I need to perform in May of the coming year in the Paris Grand Opera." Unquote. Yeah, for whatever reasons, Diaghilev apparently didn't consider Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, or Nutcracker to be real Russian ballets. For me, that's a big go figure. It was decided that Diaghilev's new, real Russian ballet would be based on the Russian folktale of the Firebird. The commission to compose the music for the Firebird was first offered to Anatol Konstantinovich Lyadov, 1855 to 1914. Well, Lyadov turned the commission down. Diaghilev then offered the commission to Nikolai Nikolaevich Cherepnin, 1873 to 1945. Cherepnin turned the project down. So Diaghilev fired off a telegram to his Chopin arranger. Perhaps Stravinsky was interested in taking on a major commission? Ha! Do Russian bears poop in the woods? Working from a scenario prepared by the choreographer Mikhail Fokine and the designer Alexandre Benoit, Stravinsky turned out the fully orchestrated 45-minute score in under 6 months, warp speed, given his usually slow and meticulous compositional pace. At the final rehearsal of the Firebird, Diaghilev pointed to Stravinsky and said to the dancers, quote, "Mark him well. He is a man on the eve of celebrity." Unquote. As usual, Diaghilev was correct. The Firebird was everything he wanted it to be, and it scored a triumph. For the Parisian public and press, it was just the sort of rip-roaring, exotic, colorful, ever so slightly barbaric Russian ballet product that they wanted and expected from a company called the Ballets Russes. A partnership made in heaven. While he was composing the Firebird, Igor Stravinsky had a visitor. Quote, "One day, when I was finishing the last pages of the Firebird, I had a fleeting vision which came to me as a complete surprise, my mind at the moment being full of other things. I saw in my imagination a solemn pagan rite. Sage elders seated in a circle watched a young girl dance herself to death. They were sacrificing her to appease the god of spring." Unquote. Stravinsky told Diaghilev about his fleeting vision, and the two of them decided that it was a swell idea on which to build a ballet, a veritable Russian snuff ballet. Oh, the Parisians are gonna love it. They entitled the project The Great Sacrifice, and with the success of the Firebird still ringing in their ears, Diaghilev gave Stravinsky the go-ahead to start work on it. Stravinsky headed to Switzerland, where he intended to spend the winter of 1910-1911 working on The Great Sacrifice. But alas, the music did not come. To his eternal credit, Rather than just bang his head against a wall, Stravinsky did what writers and composers are advised to do when in block mode, and that is distract oneself by writing something else. Stravinsky sketched some music for piano and orchestra that he described as being, quote, a sort of concert piece based on a distinct picture of a puppet, suddenly endowed with life, exasperating the patience of the orchestra with diabolical cascades of arpeggios, unquote. Soon enough, Diaghilev dropped in on Stravinsky to see how The Great Sacrifice was going. Instead, Stravinsky played him his puppet music. Diaghilev was spellbound and immediately wrote to the designer, Alexandre Benoit, quote, yesterday, I heard the music of the Russian dance, which he has just composed. It is such a work of genius that one cannot contemplate anything beyond it. You alone can design it, unquote. The Great Sacrifice was put on the back burner, and in its place, a new ballet project was born entitled Petrushka, which means Little Pete. Petrushka is a traditional Russian puppet made of cloth, straw, and sawdust. But according to tradition, the little fella has a human heart. Okay, not really. That would be really gross. It's just part of the legend of the puppet, because having a heart gives Petrushka the capacity to love. It is this duality of a puppet with the human capacity to love that lies at the core of the ballet's action, and not incidentally, at the core of Stravinsky's music as well. Taking its cue from Petrushka's split personality, the action of the ballet takes place on two different levels. The first is the world of humans, everyday reality, and the second is a weird, twisted, parallel reality of puppets come to life. There are 4 scenes in Petrushka. Scenes 1 and 4 take place in the human world, and scenes 2 and 3 in the world of the puppets. What a difference 12 months can make. Petrushka received its premiere at Paris's Théâtre du Châtelet on June 13, 1911, not quite a year after the premiere of The Firebird. Nevertheless, Diaghilev didn't have to tell his dancers that Stravinsky was on the eve of celebrity, because thanks to Diaghilev and the Ballets Russes, the almost 29-year-old Stravinsky was already a celebrity, though that celebrity would skyrocket after the premiere of Petrushka. With the role of Petrushka danced by Václav Nijinsky, and the role of the ballerina by Tamara Karsavina, with the choreography by Michel Fokine, sets by Alexandre Benoit, and the orchestra conducted by Pierre Monteux, Petrushka set the stage for what would be Diaghilev and Stravinsky's greatest single collaboration, when 2 years later, The Great Sacrifice, now retitled as The Rite of Spring, virtually revolutionized 20th century music and dance. When we return in tomorrow's Dr. Bob Prescribes post, it will be with 2 more epic collaborations between Diaghilev and Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring of 1913 and Pulcinella of 1920. Thank you.